The wind howled through the empty streets of Cedar Ridge like a wounded animal, driving sheets of snow against weathered storefronts and frost-covered windows. Eleanor Hartley pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little against the bitter December cold that seemed to seep through her very bones. Her boots, split at the seams and stuffed with old newspaper, left wet prints in the fresh snow as she trudged from one establishment to the next. "Please," she said to the burly man behind the counter at Morrison's general store, her voice hoarse from the cold. "I'm a hard worker. I can stock shelves, sweep floors, anything you need. I'll sleep in the storage room if you'll have me." Morrison didn't even look up from his ledger. "Got no work for vagrants? Try someplace else." Eleanor's stomach clenched. Empty now for 3 days, save for the handful of grain she'd managed to glean from the livery stable floor when no one was watching. Pride warred with desperation as she stood there, fingers numb despite being tucked under her arms. She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't a vagrant, that she'd come from a respectable family back east before circumstances had driven her west. But the words died in her throat. What did it matter now? The bell above the door chimed as she left, the sound mocking in its cheerfulness. Outside, the storm had worsened. She could barely see across the street through the swirling white. Her next stop was the Silver Dollar Saloon, though the thought of entering such a place made her chest tight with shame. Respectable women didn't frequent saloons, but respectable women didn't beg for work in barns either. The warmth hit her like a physical blow as she pushed through the doors. Smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the smell of whiskey and unwashed bodies. Conversations died as heads turned toward her. Eleanor forced herself to walk to the bar, aware of every hole in her dress, every smudge of dirt on her face. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked, his thick mustache twitching with amusement. "I'm looking for work," Eleanor said, raising her chin despite the tremor in her voice. "Cleaning, cooking, whatever you might need." A man at the bar laughed, ugly and harsh. "Oh, I bet you are. Sweetheart, question is, what kind of work you willing to do?" Heat flooded Eleanor's face, but she kept her eyes on the bartender. "Honest work. I can scrub floors, wash dishes." "Plenty of girls already doing that kind of work here," the bartender interrupted, not unkindly but firm. "And they do other work besides. If you catch my meaning, that's the only position I got open." Eleanor's hands clenched in her skirts. She turned without another word and fled back into the storm, laughter following her out. The cold was almost a relief after the humiliation burning in her chest. She tried the hotel next, then the boarding house, then even the undertaker's parlor. The responses were always the same: suspicious looks, curt dismissals, sometimes crude suggestions that made her hurry away with tears freezing on her cheeks. As the afternoon wore on, her steps grew slower, her body shaking not just from cold but from weakness. The last place at the edge of town was Hutchinson's livery. Old Sam Hutchinson was feeding the horses when she entered, the warmth from the animals' bodies creating clouds of steam in the air. He looked up at her approach, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Help you, miss?" "I need work," Eleanor said simply. She was too tired now for elaborate pleas. "I'll muck stalls, tend the horses, anything. I don't need wages, just—" She swallowed hard. "Just let me sleep in the barn, in the hay. I won't be any trouble." Sam's frown deepened as he took in her appearance, the hollowed cheeks, the blue tinge to her lips, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You got family, girl, someone looking for you?" "No one." The words came out as barely a whisper. "There's no one left," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, miss, I feel for you, but I can't have unmarried women sleeping in my barn. What would folks say, bad for business? There's a church at the other end of town could help you." "I've tried the church." Eleanor's voice cracked. "They said they couldn't help someone of questionable moral character. On account of you asking to sleep in barns, I reckon," Sam said, not without sympathy. It ain't proper. Miss, you understand that. Eleanor understood. She understood that propriety mattered more than kindness, that reputation trumped compassion, that it was better to let someone freeze than risk the whispers of neighbors. She understood it all perfectly. Could I at least warm myself for a moment? She asked. Just until the worst of the storm passes. Sam hesitated, then jerked his head toward a pile of hay bales. Few minutes, then you gotta move on. Eleanor sank onto the hay, her body shaking uncontrollably now. She pressed her hands between her knees, trying to force warmth back into her fingers. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, and she found herself envying them their shelter, their guaranteed meals, their value in the eyes of men. Through the open barn door, she could see the storm still raging. Night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with it. She knew with a strange, detached clarity that she wouldn't survive the night outdoors. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Not quite fear, but something closer to resignation. Time's up, miss. Sam called from across the barn. Storm or no storm, you gotta go. Eleanor stood on unsteady legs. Thank you for your kindness, she said, meaning it despite everything. At least he'd given her a few minutes of warmth. That was more than most had offered. She made it to the barn door before her knees buckled. The last thing she remembered was the shocked look on Sam's face as she crumpled into the snow. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of hoofbeats approaching through the storm. When she woke, it was to voices raised in argument. She lay still, not quite able to open her eyes, aware only that she was warm and that her head pounded with each word spoken. You can't bring her in here, someone was saying. Sam, she realized, I don't care who you are, it ain't decent. There was no verbal response, just a long silence that somehow felt more forceful than any words. People will talk. Sam tried again, his voice lower now, almost pleading. You know how they feel about your kind mixing with white women. It'll bring trouble for everyone. Still silence. Eleanor managed to crack her eyes open. She was lying on a blanket near a pot-bellied stove, still in the barn, but warmer than she'd been in weeks. Two figures stood near the door, Sam wringing his hands, and another man whose back was to her. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders. He wore buckskins and a heavy buffalo coat, and he stood perfectly still, like a mountain waiting out a storm. At least take her to the church, Sam said desperately. Or the doctor. Doc Meredith might. The stranger turned then, just enough for Eleanor to see his profile. High cheekbones, skin the color of burnished copper, eyes dark as winter nights. Apache, her foggy mind supplied. She'd heard about them in fearful whispers, in tales of raids and scalping, in warnings to good Christian women to stay far away. He looked down at her, and their eyes met. Eleanor waited for the fear to come, but all she felt was a strange sense of recognition, as if she were looking at someone who understood what it meant to be unwanted, to exist on the margins of other people's worlds. She stays, the Apache said, his voice deep and certain as bedrock. Now see here, Sam began. The Apache moved then, just a slight shift of his weight, but Sam stepped back as if shoved. She asked for the barn. The Apache continued, each word measured and final. Give her the barn. I can't. The scandal. Then I take her. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor tried to sit up, to protest that she wasn't property to be taken, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. Where? Sam demanded. Where would you take her? Your people won't want her any more than... He cut himself off, but the damage was done. The Apache's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness deepened, became more dangerous. My cabin, he said simply. She needs shelter. I have shelter. You can't be serious. A white woman, alone with a... Sam swallowed whatever word he'd been about to say. It ain't Christian. Neither is letting her die. The truth of it rang through the barn like a bell. Eleanor watched Sam's face crumble as he recognized it too. In the end, all his talk of propriety and reputation meant nothing against that simple fact. "If she agrees to it," Sam said finally, desperately. "If she chooses it of her own free will." Both men turned to look at Eleanor. She managed to push herself up on one elbow, though the effort left her breathless. The Apache watched her with those dark eyes, patient as stone. He wouldn't force her, she realized, but he wouldn't leave her either. "I asked for the barn," she whispered, her voice raw. "Just the barn." "Barn's closed," the Apache said, "but you can have my floor, by the fire." It wasn't the barn, but it was shelter. It wasn't proper, but propriety had offered her nothing but closed doors and turned backs. Eleanor looked at Sam, at his face twisted with discomfort and shame, then back at the Apache who waited without judgment. She nodded, just once. The Apache bent and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. Eleanor's head spun at the sudden movement, and she pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke and winter wind. As he carried her toward the door, she heard Sam's last, desperate protest. "People will destroy her for this. You know they will." The Apache paused at the threshold. "They already have," he said quietly. Then they were out in the storm, but Eleanor barely felt the cold, wrapped in the stranger's buffalo coat, carried through the swirling snow toward whatever fate awaited her. She closed her eyes and let herself, for the first time in months, stop fighting. The next morning brought a false calm to Cedar Ridge. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white that masked the ugliness beneath. At Morrison's general store, 3 women huddled near the pickle barrel, their voices carrying clearly in the cold air. "Sam Hutchinson says that Apache carried her right out of his barn." "Mrs." Morrison whispered, though her whisper could have been heard across the street. Bold as brass, like he had every right. The Hartley girl, Mrs. Pemberton clutched her parcels tighter. "I knew she'd come to no good, begging around town like that, but to go with one of them—" "She must have been desperate." The third woman, young Mrs. Davies, ventured softly. The other 2 turned on her with sharp looks. "Desperate or not, there are lines a decent woman doesn't cross." "Mrs." Morrison said firmly, "death would be preferable to such disgrace." Across town at the Silver Dollar Saloon, the talk was coarser but the sentiment the same. Men nursed their morning whiskeys and spat tobacco juice into brass spittoons while they discussed the scandal. "That big Apache calls himself Stone Rivers," Jake Colby said, dealing cards with practiced ease. "Lives up in that cabin past Miller's Creek. Been there 2 winters now, keeping to himself mostly." "Until now," another man grunted. "Always knew he'd cause trouble. Their kind always do." "What kind of woman goes willing with a savage?" This from Tom Hutchinson, Sam's nephew, his young face flushed with more than drink. "My uncle tried to warn her." Jake laughed, ugly and knowing. "Same kind that begs to sleep in barns, I reckon. Probably grateful for any bed, even if it's—" "That's enough." The voice came from the corner table where Dr. Meredith sat with his coffee. The older man's eyes were tired behind his spectacles. "Whatever else she may be, Eleanor Hartley is still a woman in need. Perhaps we should remember that. She made her choice." "Doc," Jake said, unrepentant. "Now she'll live with it. Question is, what are we going to do about it?" The doctor stood, leaving his coffee unfinished. "I suggest we do nothing. It's no business of ours." "No business of ours when a white woman's living with a savage." Tom's voice rose. "What happens when more of them get ideas, when they think they can just take—" "No one took anyone." "Doctor," Meredith interrupted quietly. "From what Sam told me, she went willingly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to tend." He left the saloon, but the conversations continued, growing uglier with each retelling. By noon, Eleanor Hartley's name was on every tongue in Cedar Ridge, spoken with the mixture of scandalized delight and vicious condemnation reserved for fallen women. At the church, Reverend Blackwood prepared his Sunday sermon with grim determination. The topic would be temptation and the wages of sin, though everyone would know who he meant. He'd tried to help the girl when she first arrived in town, had offered her a meal and prayers, but she'd been too proud to accept proper guidance, and now look where that pride had led her. His wife entered the study with tea, her face pinched with disapproval. "I've just come from the Ladies' Aid Society meeting. They're all talking about the Hartley situation." "As well they should be," the Reverend replied. "It's a cautionary tale for our young women. Some are saying we should have done more." "Mrs. Blackwood said carefully, when she first came seeking help?" The Reverend's face darkened. "We offered her what charity we could. She chose instead to pursue other arrangements. The blame lies entirely with her." But even as he spoke, he remembered turning her away from the church door that cold night 3 weeks ago, telling her they couldn't shelter someone who'd been seen entering saloons and begging at men's establishments. The memory sat uneasily in his chest. Though he pushed it aside, standards had to be maintained. At the edge of town, Sheriff William Donnelly stood at his office window, watching the street. His deputy, young Charlie Banks, shifted nervously behind him. "Think there'll be trouble, Sheriff?" Donnelly sighed. "There's always trouble when folks get riled about Indians and white women. Question is, how much and how soon?" "Maybe we should ride out there," Charlie suggested. "Check on things. Make sure she's safe." The sheriff turned, his weathered face skeptical. "Safe from what Stone Rivers ain't never caused no trouble. Keeps to himself. Trades fair when he comes to town. Man's got a right to take in a boarder if he chooses." "But she's a grown woman who made a choice," Donnelly interrupted. "May not be a choice you or I would like, but last I checked, there's no law against it." Charlie persisted. "People are talking about riding out there. Tom Hutchinson's gathering some of the boys." "Then you tell Tom Hutchinson that vigilante justice ain't welcome in my town," the sheriff said sharply. "Man wants to file a complaint. He can do it proper. Otherwise, he best mind his own business." But even as Charlie left to deliver the message, Donnelly knew it wouldn't be that simple. Fear and prejudice had a way of overriding sense, especially when mixed with wounded pride and whiskey. The afternoon brought a group of women to Morrison's store, their faces set with determination. Mrs. Morrison recognized them as members of the Ladies' Christian Temperance Union, led by the formidable Widow Harrington. "We've come to discuss the situation," Widow Harrington announced without preamble. "Something must be done." "About the Hartley girl, Mrs." Morrison leaned forward eagerly. "I quite agree. It's a scandal." "The scandal is that she was allowed to fall so low in the first place," the widow said severely. "Where was Christian charity when she needed it? Where was our sisterhood?" The other women shifted uncomfortably. "She brought it on herself," one ventured, "begging at saloons, sleeping in barns." "Because she was hungry and cold," Widow Harrington retorted. "I'm not excusing her current arrangement, but perhaps if we'd extended a hand sooner, she wouldn't have felt compelled to accept help from such an inappropriate source." "You're not suggesting we should have taken in a woman of questionable morals?" "Mrs." Morrison's voice was sharp. "I'm suggesting," the widow said quietly, "that perhaps we created those questionable morals through our lack of compassion, and now we must live with the consequences." The meeting dissolved into arguments, accomplishing nothing but heightening the tensions that were already crackling through the town like electricity before a storm. As evening approached, Tom Hutchinson had indeed gathered a group of young men at the saloon, liquored up and full of righteous anger. They spoke of riding out to Stone River's cabin, of rescuing Eleanor whether she wanted it or not. "It ain't right," Tom insisted, slamming his glass on the bar. "A white woman with one of them? It goes against nature. Goes against more than that, another man agreed. What happens when word spreads every Apache in the territory will think they can take our women? Jake Colby, ever the opportunist, saw a chance for profit. I'll sell you boys ammunition at a fair price, just in case that savage don't want to give her up peaceful-like. But their plans were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. The saloon doors swung open, and silence fell as a figure filled the doorway. Stone Rivers stood there, tall and imposing in his buffalo coat, snow still clinging to his long black hair. He moved into the saloon with the fluid grace of a predator, ignoring the hands that moved to rest on gun butts. His dark eyes swept the room before settling on Tom Hutchinson. "You have something to say," he said. It wasn't a question. Tom's face flushed red, but liquor gave him courage. "Yeah, I got something to say. You got no right keeping that white woman. She ain't yours to take." "She's not mine at all," Stone Rivers replied calmly. "She's her own. She chose shelter. I provided it." "You expect us to believe that?" Jake Colby sneered. "That you got a white woman in your cabin and you ain't touching her?" Something dangerous flickered in the Apache's eyes. But his voice remained level. "I expect nothing from you, but you will leave her in peace." "Or what?" Tom stood, swaying slightly. "You'll scalp us." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Stone Rivers smiled, a slight curve of lips that was somehow more threatening than any scowl. "No," he said softly. "I'll tell Sheriff Donnelly about the cards Jake's been marking, about the watered whiskey Tom's uncle sells, about the horses with changed brands in Peterson's corral." His gaze swept the room. "I see much from my cabin. I stay quiet because I choose peace. But if you bring trouble to my door, I will speak." The men shifted uneasily. Everyone had secrets in a frontier town. Little corruptions that were overlooked as long as nobody made a fuss. "You threaten us." Jake's hand moved toward his gun. "I offer a trade," Stone Rivers corrected. "Peace for peace. You leave the woman alone. I continue to see nothing." Dr. Meredith, who'd been sitting quietly in his corner, stood up. "Seems fair to me," he said mildly. "The lady made her choice. Christian thing would be to respect it." "Christian," Tom spat. "Ain't nothing Christian about—" "About showing mercy," the doctor interrupted. "About minding our own business. Seems to me those are very Christian values indeed." Stone Rivers inclined his head slightly to the doctor, then turned back to the room at large. "She needs time to heal, to rest. When she's strong again, she'll choose her own path. Until then, anyone who disturbs her peace will answer to me." He left as quietly as he'd come, but his presence lingered like smoke. The men returned to their drinks, but the fire had gone out of their plans. Nobody wanted to test whether the Apache's threats were idle ones. Outside, Stone Rivers mounted his horse, a magnificent black stallion that stood out stark against the snow. He'd come to town for supplies, but the whispers had reached him even at his isolated cabin. Eleanor had been sleeping when he left, curled by his fire like a wounded animal. But he knew she'd wake soon to the reality of what her choice meant. As he rode back through the gathering dusk, he thought of the fear in the townspeople's eyes, the hatred, the assumptions. They saw what they expected to see, a savage who'd taken a white woman. They couldn't conceive of simple kindness, of one outcast helping another. Let them think what they would. He'd weathered worse storms than their disapproval. The question was whether Eleanor Hartley had the strength to do the same. Behind him, Cedar Ridge settled into an uneasy night, its citizens wrestling with conscience and prejudice in equal measure. The scandal of Eleanor Hartley and the Apache would dominate conversations for days to come, growing more lurid with each telling. And at the heart of it all, two people who wanted nothing more than to be left alone were about to discover that sometimes the greatest cruelty comes from those who believe themselves righteous. Eleanor woke to the sound of wood being added to the fire. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Rough log walls, a stone fireplace, and the scent of pine and leather. Memory flooded back, the barn, the storm, the massive Apache who'd carried her through the snow. She sat up slowly, aware of her disheveled appearance, her torn dress and matted hair. Stone Rivers crouched by the fire, his back to her, adjusting the logs with practiced efficiency. He'd removed his buffalo coat, and she could see the powerful muscles of his shoulders move beneath his buckskin shirt. "There's water," he said without turning. "And cloth, by the basin." Eleanor looked where he indicated and saw a wooden bowl filled with clean water, a folded piece of cloth beside it. She rose unsteadily, her legs still weak, and made her way to it. The water was warm. He must have heated it while she slept. As she washed her face and hands, she stole glances at her rescuer. He remained by the fire, giving her privacy without leaving the room. It was a small courtesy, but after months of being treated like a nuisance or worse, it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly when she finished. He turned then, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that should have been frightening but wasn't. "You need food," he said simply. "Sit." Eleanor returned to the blanket by the fire while he moved to a corner of the cabin where supplies were stored. She watched him work, noting the economical grace of his movements, the way he seemed to fill the space without overwhelming it. He returned with a bowl of something that smelled of herbs and meat. Her stomach clenched painfully at the aroma. She'd forgotten what real food smelled like. "Eat slow," he warned, handing her the bowl. "Your body forgot how—" The first spoonful nearly undid her. The broth was rich and warming, with chunks of venison and wild roots. She forced herself to eat slowly as he'd instructed, though every instinct screamed at her to devour it all at once. Stone Rivers settled across from her, his own bowl in hand. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence she'd grown accustomed to in town. This was peaceful, companionable even. "Why?" she asked finally, when her bowl was half empty and her stomach had stopped its desperate clenching. "Why help me?" He considered the question, his gaze fixed on the fire. "You asked for barn, just barn, not charity, not pity. Work for shelter." He paused. "I understand that." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Yes, he would understand. Wouldn't he, an Apache living alone outside a white town, trading his skills for the supplies he needed, neither welcomed nor wanted? "They'll make trouble for you," she said, "because of me." "They make trouble anyway." His tone was matter of fact. "Your presence changes nothing." "It changes everything." Eleanor set down her bowl, her appetite suddenly gone. "A white woman in your home. They'll never let that stand." "Then you leave when strong," he said simply. "Your choice." "Your choice." The words echoed in the small cabin. When was the last time anyone had offered her a real choice? Not between degradation and death, not between begging and starving, but a genuine choice to stay or go as she pleased. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted quietly. "Then you stay until you do." He rose, collecting their bowls. "Rest now. Tomorrow brings what it brings." Eleanor wanted to protest, to insist she could work, could earn her keep, but exhaustion was pulling at her again, and the warmth of the fire was so welcoming after so many cold nights. She must have dozed, because when she woke again, daylight was filtering through the cabin's single window. Stone Rivers was gone, but the fire still burned steady. A fresh bowl of water sat by the basin, and beside it, folded neatly, was a dress. Eleanor picked it up with trembling hands. It was simple homespun, clearly meant for a woman shorter and stouter than herself, but it was clean and whole. She didn't want to think about where he might have gotten it, what trades he might have made. She changed quickly, relieved to be out of her tattered dress. The new one was too short and pulled tight across the shoulders, but it covered her properly. She finger-combed her hair as best she could, wishing for a proper brush. The cabin door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Stone Rivers carrying an armload of firewood. He glanced at her, noting the dress, but made no comment as he stacked the wood by the fireplace. "I should help," Eleanor said. "I can carry wood, tend the fire, cook." "Later," he said, "when strong." "I'm strong enough now." She stood to prove it, though the room spun slightly. "I won't be a burden." He straightened, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Not burden," he said firmly. "Guest." "Guests don't stay indefinitely," Eleanor countered. "If I'm to stay, I work." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Stubborn," he observed. "Practical," she corrected. This time he did smile, just slightly. "Tomorrow," he conceded. "Today, rest." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but a knock at the door interrupted them. They both froze. Stone Rivers moved to the door with the fluid caution of a wild animal, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Who comes?" he called through the wood. "Dr. Meredith," came the reply. "I'm alone." Stone Rivers relaxed fractionally and opened the door. The doctor stood on the threshold, medical bag in hand, his breath misting in the cold air. "I came to check on Miss Hartley," he said, his gaze finding Eleanor. "May I come in?" Stone Rivers stepped aside silently. "Doctor." Meredith entered, removing his hat. His eyes took in the scene. Eleanor in her new dress, the tidy cabin, the evidence of care and comfort. "Miss Hartley," he said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eleanor replied, suddenly self-conscious. This man had been one of the many who'd turned her away in town. "Much better." "I'm glad to hear it." He set down his bag. "Would you allow me to examine you? You were in poor condition when you left town." Eleanor glanced at Stone Rivers, who had moved to stand by the window, his back to them, but his presence still protective. "Yes," she said quietly. The doctor was professional and thorough, checking her pulse, looking at her eyes, gently probing for signs of frostbite. "You were lucky," he said finally. "A few more hours in that storm." "I know," Eleanor said. "Doctor." Meredith packed up his instruments, then hesitated. "Miss Hartley, I feel I owe you an apology. When you came to town seeking help, I failed in my duty as a physician and a Christian. I let propriety override compassion." Eleanor was too surprised to respond immediately. "You weren't the only one," she said finally. "No, but that doesn't excuse it." He stood, reaching into his coat. "I've brought some supplies, medicine, bandages, a few other things you might need." "I can't pay." "No payment expected or wanted," he interrupted gently. "Consider it a very small attempt at restitution." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The town is agitated about your situation here. There's talk of riding out, of forcing you to leave." "Let them come," Stone Rivers said from the window, his voice flat. "I'd rather avoid bloodshed," the doctor said carefully. "Miss Hartley, if you were to tell me you're here of your own free will, that you're safe and cared for, I could relay that to the town. It might calm some tempers." Eleanor stood straighter. "I am here by choice," she said clearly. "Mr. Rivers has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. I'm safer here than I ever was begging for church charity in Cedar Ridge." The doctor nodded slowly. "I'll tell them, though I doubt it will satisfy everyone." "Nothing will," Stone Rivers observed. "They see what they choose." "Perhaps, Doctor," Meredith agreed sadly. He put on his hat. "I'll come again in a few days, if that's acceptable, just to check on your recovery. Miss Hartley." After he left, the cabin seemed smaller somehow, as if the outside world had intruded on their quiet sanctuary. Eleanor sank onto a wooden stool, suddenly exhausted by the brief interaction. "He meant well," she said, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to defend the doctor. "Yes," Stone Rivers agreed. "Too late, but yes." Eleanor looked up at him. "It doesn't matter what I tell them, does it? They'll believe what they want to believe." "Yes," he said again, moving from the window to add wood to the fire. "Question is what you believe." "What do you mean?" He straightened, fixing her with that steady gaze. "You thank for kindness, speak of burden, worry of trouble. You see self through their eyes still." He gestured toward the door, toward the town beyond. "Until you stop, you not truly free." The words stung because they were true. Even here, in this quiet cabin where she'd been shown more genuine kindness than in months of begging. She couldn't stop seeing herself as Cedar Ridge saw her, fallen, shameful, a burden to be endured. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted quietly. "Learn," he said simply. "Take time, no hurry." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. When had anyone last offered her time? Everything had been urgent for so long. Finding food, finding shelter, finding work. Survival had consumed every moment, left no space for anything else. "Why?" she asked again. "Why offer this to me?" Stone Rivers was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Once, I too asked for just barn, just place to rest, to work. Many doors closed." He met her eyes. "Learn what it means to be nothing in others' eyes. Won't do same." Eleanor felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away impatiently, embarrassed by the display of emotion. "Tears not weakness," he said quietly. "Just water leaving body. Let them go." And somehow, that simple permission undid her completely. The tears came then, all the ones she'd held back through months of humiliation and hunger and cold. She cried for her lost family, for her abandoned dreams, for the girl she'd been before circumstance had carved away everything but the need to survive. Stone Rivers didn't move to comfort her, didn't speak platitudes or tell her to stop. He simply went about the small tasks of the cabin, banking the fire, checking the water barrel, mending a tear in a leather pouch. His presence was steady, undemanding, allowing her the space to grieve without judgment or impatience. When the storm finally passed, Eleanor felt empty but somehow cleaner, as if the tears had washed away some of the weight she'd been carrying. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. He nodded once, then handed her a cup of pine needle tea. "Tomorrow," he said. "You work if you choose, help with cabin, learn woods, but only if you choose. Not from duty, not from debt, from choice." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling something she'd thought lost forever possibility. Not certainty, not safety, those might never come again. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, tomorrow held something other than dread. "From choice," she repeated softly, tasting the words like foreign fruit. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin was warm and quiet. Two outcasts sat by the fire, neither speaking, both understanding that sometimes the greatest gift is simply to be allowed to exist without justification or apology. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but today, for the first time in months, Eleanor Hartley was simply, blessedly, enough. The cabin became her world, small but sufficient. 4 log walls chinked with mud and moss. A stone fireplace that Stone Rivers had built with his own hands. A sleeping area separated by a heavy blanket he'd hung for her privacy. Eleanor had insisted on taking the corner farthest from the fire, but he'd simply moved her blankets back to the warmth while she slept. Days fell into a rhythm. Stone Rivers would rise before dawn, moving silent as shadow to tend the fire and heat water for washing. Eleanor would wake to find him already gone, checking his trap lines or hunting. But always there was warm water. Always the fire burned steady. She learned to read his care in these small gestures, words he didn't speak, kindness he wouldn't name. She kept her promise to work. At first, he watched her carefully, ready to intervene if she overtaxed her strength. But Eleanor had spoken true. She was no stranger to hard work. She swept the packed earth floor, scrubbed the few dishes they used, learned to bank the fire properly to hold through the night. When he returned with game, she watched him clean and prepare it, memorizing each step. "Like this," he would say, showing her how to separate sinew for thread, how to scrape a hide clean, how to smoke meat so it would keep through winter. His hands were patient, precise. He never grew frustrated with her mistakes, simply showed her again. One evening, a week into her stay, Eleanor was struggling with a piece of hide, trying to work it soft as he'd taught her. Her hands, still weak from her ordeal, cramped and fumbled. "Rest," Stone Rivers said from where he sat sharpening his hunting knife. "I can do it," Eleanor insisted, though her fingers betrayed her. He set down the knife and moved to sit across from her, holding out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she passed him the hide, but instead of taking over the work, he positioned it between them. "Together," he said simply. He showed her how to use the weight of her arms when her fingers grew tired, how to work with the leather's natural grain instead of against it. Their hands moved in concert, his guiding without taking over, hers learning the rhythm. The hide grew supple between them. "You're a good teacher," Eleanor said softly. "Had good teacher," he replied. "Grandmother. Much patience with stubborn boy." It was the most he'd ever shared about his past. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but sensed this was a gift, these small pieces of history. She would not grab for more than he chose to give. That night, as they ate rabbit stew by the fire, Stone Rivers produced something from his pack, a wooden comb, its teeth carved fine and even. "For hair," he said, placing it on the table between them. Eleanor picked it up with reverent hands. Such a simple thing, but after weeks of finger combing, it felt like treasure. "Where did you—" "Made it," he said, focusing on his stew. Hair like sunset should not be tangled. Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks. Hair like sunset. No one had ever— She clutched the comb, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Later, as she worked the comb through her hair by firelight, she caught him watching from beneath lowered lids. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and something passed between them. Recognition of a shift, a change in the air like weather turning. The next morning brought the first test of their fragile peace. Eleanor was outside, learning to split kindling, when she heard horses approaching. Stone Rivers emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand but held loose. Not threatening. Not yet. 3 riders appeared through the trees. Eleanor recognized Tom Hutchinson immediately, along with Jake Colby and another man she'd seen around town. They reined up just outside what seemed to be an invisible boundary, their horses stamping and blowing in the cold air. "Miss Hartley," Tom called, ignoring Stone Rivers entirely. "We've come to take you back to town. Doc Meredith says you're well enough to travel." Eleanor set down the hatchet carefully. "The doctor said no such thing." "Don't matter what he said." Jake interjected, "This ain't proper. You being out here, we've come to fix that." "There's nothing to fix," Eleanor said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm here by choice." Tom's face reddened. No decent woman chooses to live with a savage. "You're confused, maybe scared. We understand, but we're here now. You're safe." "Safe," Eleanor laughed, the sound bitter. "Where was this concern for my safety when I was freezing in your streets, when I begged for work and was offered only shame?" "That's different." "Yes," Eleanor cut him off. "It's different because then my desperation was amusing to you. Now it's inconvenient. Now it challenges what you think you know about the world." Stone Rivers remained silent throughout, but she felt his presence like a solid wall at her back, not protecting. She didn't need protection from words, just there, steady as mountain stone. "You're making a mistake," Tom tried again, his voice wheeling. Think of your reputation." "My reputation?" Eleanor stepped forward, anger giving her strength. "My reputation died the first night I slept in a barn. You all made sure of that. Every whisper, every turn back, every closed door, you killed it as surely as if you'd put a bullet in it." "We tried to maintain standards." "You tried to maintain comfort," Eleanor said fiercely. "Your comfort, built on my degradation." "Well, I'm done being the cautionary tale you tell your daughters. I'm done begging for crumbs of charity wrapped in judgment." Jake's hand moved to his gun. "Maybe you ain't thinking clear. Maybe that Apache has you under some heathen spell." The click of Stone Rivers cocking his rifle was soft but unmistakable. "Right on," he said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "Now, you threatening us, Indian." "Stating fact." Stone Rivers replied, "Sun moves west. Snow comes again soon. Smart men seek shelter before dark." Tom leaned forward in his saddle. "This ain't over. The whole town's talking. Decent folk won't stand for this corruption." "Then decent folk should tend their own gardens," Eleanor said. "I'll tend mine." The men wheeled their horses around, but Jake couldn't resist a parting shot. "When he's done with you, when you come crawling back to town, don't expect any doors to open. You're choosing to be a squaw now. Remember that." After they'd gone, Eleanor found herself trembling, not from fear, but from the release of saying words she'd held back for so long. Stone Rivers uncocked his rifle, studying her with those dark, knowing eyes. "Words have power," he observed. "Yours carry fire now." Eleanor laughed shakily. "I don't know where that came from." "From truth," he said simply. "Truth always carries fire." That evening, he taught her to shoot. Not the rifle, that would come later, but a small pistol he produced from somewhere in the cabin's depths. "Why now?" Eleanor asked as he showed her how to load it. "They come back," he said matter-of-factly. "Maybe with more men, maybe with sheriff. Need to be ready." Eleanor's hand stilled on the gun. "I won't shoot lawmen. Not asking you to, but knowing you can changes how you stand, how you speak." He adjusted her grip. "Power is not in using, is in choosing not to." She thought about that as she aimed at the target he'd set up, a piece of wood marked with charcoal. Her first shots went wild, but Stone Rivers was patient, correcting her stance, her breathing, her tendency to jerk the trigger instead of squeeze. "Like working leather," he said. "Steady pressure. Work with, not against." By full dark, she was hitting the target more often than not. Her arm ached and her ears rang despite the cloth he'd shown her to stuff in them. But there was satisfaction in it. Not in the potential for violence, but in the capability itself. "I've never owned anything that could protect me," she said as they cleaned the weapons by firelight. Never had the means to say no and make it stick. Stone Rivers looked up from the rifle he was oiling. "Had means," he corrected gently. "Just taught it was wrong to use. Woman's strength different from man's, but not less. They tell you otherwise to keep you weak." Eleanor considered this. All her life she'd been taught that her power lay in gentleness, in submission, in finding a man to protect her. But where had that led to begging in streets, to sleeping in barns, to being seen as something less than human because she had no male keeper? "My mother would be horrified," she said softly. "A lady doesn't touch weapons, doesn't raise her voice, doesn't live with strange men in cabins in the woods." "Mother here?" Stone Rivers asked. "No, died 3 years ago. Father too, and my brother in the war. That's when I started west. Thought I could find work, start fresh." She laughed bitterly. "Didn't realize a woman alone is everyone's property and no one's responsibility." "Not alone now," he said quietly. Eleanor looked across the fire at him. His face was painted in gold and shadow. Strong bones and deep eyes that saw too much. Not alone. Such simple words. But they shifted something fundamental in her chest. "No," she agreed softly. "Not alone. Later. lying on her pallet behind the blanket partition. Eleanor listened to the night sounds of the cabin, Stone River's steady breathing, the settling of logs in the fire, wind through the pines outside. For the first time since she'd begun her westward journey, she felt anchored, not safe. She wasn't fool enough to believe in safety anymore, but held, somehow, seen, valued for more than what she could offer men in trade. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. The town would scheme, would judge, would try to force their will upon her choices. But tonight, she was warm and fed and armed with new knowledge. Tonight, she was learning what it meant to be strong in ways they couldn't understand. The comb he'd carved lay beneath her pillow, smooth wood still carrying his warmth, hair like sunset. He'd said. Eleanor touched her hair, feeling it soft and clean and untangled. Such a small compliment, offered sidelong and without expectation, but it glowed in her chest like coals banked for the night, ready to flame again come morning. Not alone. The words followed her into sleep, a promise and a revolution all at once. The whispers followed Eleanor like smoke. 3 weeks had passed since she'd taken shelter with Stone Rivers, and her rare trips to town for supplies had become gauntlets of hostile stares and cutting remarks. She kept her head high, purchased what they needed quickly, and ignored the venom that dripped from formerly polite tongues. "There she goes. Mrs." Morrison stage whispered as Eleanor passed the general store. Bold as brass, not an ounce of shame left in her. "What do you expect from a woman who'd lie down with a savage Mrs.?" Pemberton replied, loud enough to carry across the street. "She's ruined, through and through." Eleanor's hands tightened on her basket, but she didn't pause. Stone Rivers had offered to make the town trips alone, but she'd refused. These people had no power over her anymore. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of driving her into hiding. At the feed store, Mr. Garrett served her with obvious reluctance, handling her money as if it carried disease. "That Apache treating you right?" he asked, his tone suggesting he hoped otherwise. "Mr. Rivers has been nothing but generous and respectful," Eleanor replied evenly, counting out coins for grain and salt. Garrett snorted. "That what you call it now, generous?" He leered at her. "Bet he's teaching you all sorts of heathen ways up in that cabin." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "He's taught me to shoot, to work leather, and to read tracks in the snow. If those are heathen ways, I'm grateful for them." The man's face darkened. "Uppity talk won't serve you well, missy. You'd best remember what you are now." "I remember exactly what I am," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm alive, fed, warm, working honest work for honest shelter. That's more than this town ever offered me." She left with her purchases, but the encounters grew uglier with each trip. Young boys threw stones, though they scattered when she turned to face them. Men made crude propositions, assuming that a woman who'd fallen with one man would fall with any. Women crossed the street to avoid her, clutching their skirts as if her presence might contaminate them. The worst came from Reverend Blackwood's wife, who cornered Eleanor outside the post office. "I'll pray for your immortal soul," she announced, her pinched face radiating false piety. "Though I fear it may be too late. The Lord doesn't look kindly on women who fornicate with heathens." "And how does he look on those who turn away the hungry and desperate?" Eleanor asked quietly. "I seem to recall something about entertaining angels unaware." "Mrs." Blackwood's face flushed ugly red. "Don't you dare quote scripture at me, you shameless hussy. You've made your choice. You'll burn for it, in this life and the next." That evening, Eleanor returned to the cabin shaking with suppressed fury. Stone Rivers took one look at her face and relieved her of the heavy basket. Setting it aside without comment, he poured her pine needle tea and sat across from her, waiting. "They're getting worse," Eleanor finally said. "The things they say—" "Words," he said simply. "Only words. Words have power. You told me that." "Yes, when you give them power. He leaned forward slightly. Their words come from fear. Small minds, small hearts. You threat to them. Eleanor laughed bitterly. How am I a threat? I have nothing, am nothing in their eyes. Exactly. Stone Rivers's eyes were intent. You should be broken, should crawl to them, beg forgiveness, confirm their beliefs. Instead, you stand tall, choose different path. This frightens them. It doesn't feel like I'm frightening anyone. It feels like I'm just enduring. Enduring is strength, he said. Mountain endures wind. Water endures rock. Both win in end. That night, as they worked side by side preparing the evening meal, Eleanor found herself studying him, the efficient grace of his movements, the way firelight played across the strong planes of his face, the gentle precision of hands that could field dress a deer or carve delicate patterns in wood with equal skill. You never ask, she said suddenly. He glanced at her. Ask what? What they say about us, about what they think we're doing. Stone Rivers returned to cutting wild onions. Know what they think? Doesn't matter. Doesn't it bother you what they assume? He set down the knife, giving her his full attention. 20 winters I live here. They assume many things. That I steal horses, raid homes, worship dark spirits. All false. Truth doesn't change their minds, so I stopped trying. But this is different. This is about intimate things. Is it? His gaze was steady. They think I take you against will, or you so fallen, you welcome savage touch. Either way, makes them feel superior, safe in their righteousness. Eleanor's cheeks burned. And the truth? Truth is, you sleep there. He gestured to her curtained corner. I sleep here. You work, I work. We eat, talk of day, sit by fire. Simple truth, but too simple for their stories. Sometimes, Eleanor started, then stopped, her courage failing. Speak, he encouraged gently. Sometimes I wonder if they're right, if I am ruined. Not because of staying here, but because I can't imagine going back to their world. Wearing their proper dresses, speaking their proper words, pretending their cruelty is civilization. Stone Rivers was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose and went to a wooden chest in the corner, returning with something wrapped in soft leather. He handed it to her silently. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay inside. A dress, but unlike any she'd seen. Soft doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that seemed to flow like water. It was beautiful, practical, and nothing like the constraining garments she'd grown up wearing. Was grandmother's, Stone Rivers said quietly. Made for her wedding. She say, proper dress is one that lets woman be woman, not doll. I couldn't, Eleanor breathed, though her hands couldn't stop stroking the butter-soft leather. Is gift, he said firmly. Not for them, for you. Wear when ready, or not. Choice yours. Eleanor held the dress to her chest, tears threatening. Why are you so kind to me? Something shifted in his expression, a softening she'd glimpsed before, but never so clearly. First night, you burn with fever, speak in dreams, call for mother, father, beg for just one person to see you as human. He paused. I know that prayer. The tears came then. Silent ones that she didn't try to hide. Stone Rivers didn't move to comfort her, didn't speak empty reassurances. He simply returned to preparing their meal, giving her the space to feel without performance or apology. 2 days later, trouble arrived in a more official form. Eleanor was outside, using the skills Stone Rivers had taught her to flesh a rabbit hide, when she heard horses, many of them. She whistled low, the warning signal they'd established, and Stone Rivers emerged from the trees where he'd been checking snares. Sheriff Donnelly rode at the head of a group of 8 men, his deputy Charlie beside him. Eleanor recognized most of the others. Tom Hutchinson, Jake Colby, Reverend Blackwood, and several prominent townsmen. Their faces were grim, determined. "Miss Hartley," the sheriff called, touching his hat brim. "Mr. Rivers." At least he acknowledged Stone Rivers' presence, unlike the others. "I'm afraid I need to speak with you both." Stone Rivers moved to stand beside Eleanor, not touching but close enough that she felt his warmth. "Speak," he said simply. The sheriff dismounted, though the others remained on their horses. "There's been talk in town, concerns about Miss Hartley's situation. Some folks think she might be here against her will." "Ask her," Stone Rivers said. Sheriff Donnelly looked at Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, are you here of your own free will?" "Yes," Eleanor said clearly. "Completely and absolutely." "She doesn't know what she's saying," Reverend Blackwood interrupted from his mount. "She's been corrupted, confused." "Reverend," the sheriff warned, then turned back to Eleanor. "You're sure? Miss, no one's threatening you, forcing you." Eleanor set down the hide and stood, squaring her shoulders. "Sheriff, when I was starving in your town, when I begged for work and shelter, where were these concerned citizens when I collapsed in Sam Hutchinson's barn, who rode out to check on my welfare?" The sheriff's weathered face showed discomfort. "I understand you might have hard feelings." "No," Eleanor cut him off. "I don't think you do understand. These men aren't here out of concern for me. They're here because my presence in this cabin, my choice to accept Mr. Rivers's hospitality, challenges their comfortable beliefs about how the world should work." "You're living in sin," Reverend Blackwood thundered. "It's our Christian duty." "Your Christian duty was to feed the hungry and shelter the homeless." Eleanor shot back. "You failed in that. You don't get to claim righteousness now." Jake Colby spat tobacco juice. "Sheriff, we came here to remove this woman from a dangerous situation. Are you going to do your duty or not?" Sheriff Donnelly's face hardened. "My duty is to uphold the law. Colby, last I checked, there's no law against a woman choosing where she lives." "There's laws against corrupting white women," Tom Hutchinson started. "Careful," the sheriff warned. "Those laws require proof of force or coercion. You prepared to swear you've witnessed such?" The men shifted uneasily. Accusation was one thing, perjury before a sheriff was another. "Perhaps." Reverend Blackwood tried a different approach. "Miss Hartley would accept accommodation in town. My wife and I would be willing to take her in, provide proper guidance." "Now," Eleanor laughed, the sound sharp. "Now you offer charity when I'm fed and clothed and warm. Where was this Christian generosity when I had nothing?" "We're trying to save you," the Reverend insisted. "From what?" Eleanor demanded. "From honest work, from warm shelter, from the first person in months to treat me with genuine respect." She looked at each man in turn. "You're trying to save yourselves from the discomfort of seeing your cruelty reflected back at you." Stone Rivers spoke then, his voice carrying quiet authority. "The woman speaks her mind. She stays or goes as she chooses. This talk is finished." "Not quite," Sheriff Donnelly said. He fixed Stone Rivers with a steady gaze. "I've got to ask, for the record, you made any improper advances toward Miss Hartley?" Eleanor started to protest, but Stone Rivers touched her arm lightly, silencing her. "I offer shelter to one who needs it," he said. "Share food, warmth, knowledge. Nothing more. Her honor safe as in her father's house." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Good enough for me." He mounted his horse, looking down at the assembled men. "Gentlemen, we're done here. Miss Hartley's made her choice clear. Anyone who harasses her or Mr. Rivers will answer to the law." "This is a mistake, Sheriff," Tom Hutchinson warned. "Mark my words, no good will come of this." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed. "But it's her mistake to make." As the group rode away, Eleanor heard Reverend Blackwood saying loudly, "I'll pray for her soul, though I fear she's beyond redemption." After they'd gone, Eleanor found herself trembling. Not from fear, but from the release of speaking truths she'd held inside for so long. Stone Rivers studied her with something like approval. "You speak strong today," he observed, "like warrior." "I don't feel like a warrior," Eleanor admitted. "I feel tired." "Warriors often tired," he said, "fighting for right to exist heavy work." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Eleanor found herself looking at the doeskin dress where she'd carefully hung it. Such a simple gift, but it represented everything: choice, respect, the possibility of being something other than what others demanded. "The sheriff asked about my honor," she said suddenly, "as if that's all that matters. Not my life, not my happiness, just whether I'm still pure by their standards." Stone Rivers looked up from the arrowhead he was napping. "Their honor small thing, tied to rules, appearances. True honor different." "What's true honor?" He considered the question. "Keep word given, protect those weaker, share with those who hunger, face truth even when painful." He met her eyes. "You have true honor." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. They wouldn't agree. "No," he acknowledged. "But Mountain doesn't need Ant's agreement to be Mountain." She smiled at that, the first real smile she'd felt all day. Outside, night was falling, bringing with it the familiar sounds of the forest. Inside, the fire crackled warm and bright, pushing back the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to force her back into the mold she'd broken. But tonight, she was here, learning to be something new, something stronger than their narrow definitions could contain. The doeskin dress caught the firelight, beadwork glimmering like stars. One day, Eleanor thought, she might be brave enough to wear it, to claim fully this new self she was becoming. But not yet. For now, it was enough to know it waited, patient as the man who'd given it, for the moment when she was ready to transform completely. The confrontation came at dusk, 5 weeks into Eleanor's stay at the cabin. She and Stone Rivers had just finished the evening meal when they heard it: horses, many of them, and the low rumble of angry voices carrying through the trees. Stone Rivers rose smoothly, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "No." Eleanor stood as well, checking the pistol he'd taught her to use. "We face this together." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Together. They stepped out onto the small porch to find 15 men arranged in a semicircle before the cabin. Tom Hutchinson sat at the center, flanked by Jake Colby and several others Eleanor recognized from town. What chilled her blood was the rope Jake carried coiled on his saddle horn. "Evening, Miss Hartley," Tom said with mock courtesy. "We've come to escort you back to civilization." "I've chosen my place," Eleanor replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "You're not welcome here." "Now that's where you're wrong," Jake interjected, tobacco juice staining his chin. "See, we've been patient, given you time to come to your senses, but this arrangement has gone on long enough." Stone Rivers stood silent beside her, rifle held loosely but ready. Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from him, controlled but coiled like a spring. "The sheriff made it clear," Eleanor began. "The sheriff ain't here," Tom interrupted. "Had to ride out to Carson City on business. Won't be back for days." Funny how that worked out. Eleanor's heart sank. They'd planned this, waited for Donnelly to be gone. Without the law's protection, she and Stone Rivers faced a lynch mob with prettier manners. "You should go," Stone Rivers said, his deep voice cutting through the night. "While you can." Jake laughed ugly. "Listen to the savage giving orders. Boy, you're the reason we're here. Time someone taught you your place." "My place is here," Stone Rivers replied calmly. "On my land. You trespass." "Your land," Tom's voice rose. "This is American soil, Indian. You're just squatting on it, same as you're squatting on that white woman's honor." Eleanor stepped forward. "How dare you?" Shut your mouth, harlot. Jake snarled. Decent women don't speak to men like that. Course, you ain't decent no more. Are you? More men had dismounted now, spreading out to flank the cabin. Eleanor counted them. 15, maybe 16, all armed. The arithmetic was brutal in its simplicity. Here's what's going to happen, Tom announced, his voice taking on the tone of a man who expected obedience. Miss Hartley is coming with us. The Apache can leave vertical or horizontal, his choice. And if I refuse to go? Eleanor asked. Tom's smile was cold. Then we'll assume you're too corrupted to know your own mind. Sometimes saving a woman's virtue requires firm measures. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor understood perfectly. They would take her by force, and violence toward Stone Rivers would be just the beginning. Her mind raced, searching for some way out that didn't end in blood. Wait, she said suddenly. You claim to be Christian men, God-fearing men. That's right, someone called from the crowd. Which is why we can't abide this sin. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Then hear my confession, before God and all of you as witnesses. She took a deep breath. Mister, Rivers has never touched me with anything but respect. We don't share a bed. We don't do what you think we do. I cook, I clean, I help with the work of survival. That's all. Lies. Jake spat. No man keeps a woman without taking payment. No white man, perhaps. Eleanor shot back. But Mr. Rivers has more honor in his smallest finger than all of you combined. He took in a stranger dying in the snow, fed her, sheltered her, taught her to survive, asked for nothing in return. Pretty story, Tom said, but we all know what heathens want with white women. Stone Rivers spoke then, his voice carrying quiet authority. You speak of what I want. I tell you, I want this woman safe, want her fed, warm, strong, want her to choose her path without fear, without shame. This threatens you. Don't get philosophical with us. Indian, Jake warned. We didn't come here to debate. No, Stone Rivers agreed. You came for violence. Can smell it on you like sickness. Eleanor felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would flow. She thought desperately, then remembered something. Reverend Blackwood, she called suddenly, spotting him at the edge of the group. You're a man of God. Would you have these men commit murder on your watch? The Reverend shifted uncomfortably on his horse. No one's talking about murder, Miss Hartley. Simply removing you from a corrupting influence. And if Mr. Rivers objects, if he defends his home, Eleanor pressed. What then will you watch them gun down an unarmed man? I'm armed, Stone Rivers said mildly. Not the point, Eleanor hissed at him, then turned back to the Reverend. You preach about Christ's mercy. Where's your mercy now? Sometimes mercy requires harsh medicine, the Reverend replied, but he sounded uncertain. Like a rope, Eleanor pointed at Jake's saddle. That's your medicine, that's your Christianity. The crowd stirred uneasily. A lynching was one thing when fury ran hot, but Eleanor was forcing them to look at it cold, to acknowledge what they'd come here to do. Then Stone Rivers did something unexpected. He set down his rifle, leaning it carefully against the cabin wall. The gesture was deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. What are you doing? Eleanor whispered urgently. Choosing, he replied quietly, then raised his voice to address the mob. You want her to leave. She doesn't want to go. So I make offer. The men leaned forward, sensing advantage. Tom smiled triumphantly. The savage sees sense. What's your offer? Take me instead. The words fell like stones into still water. Eleanor gasped. No. Stone Rivers continued as if she hadn't spoken. You fear Apache corrupting white woman. Remove Apache. Problem solved. I go with you. Peaceful. But she stays. Cabin is hers. You leave her in peace. Stone Rivers? No, Eleanor said desperately. You know what they'll do. Yes, he said simply, meeting her eyes. I know. Jake laughed harshly. Well now, that's interesting. The savage offers himself up. What do you think? Boys, should we take him up on it? No. Eleanor stepped in front of Stone Rivers, facing the mob. You want someone to hang, take me. I'm the one who chose to stay. I'm the one defying your precious propriety. Eleanor, Stone Rivers said quietly, step aside. I will not. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. You stupid, noble fool. You think I could live with that? You think I could stay in this cabin knowing you died for my choices? Better than you dying for theirs, he replied softly. Tom had heard enough. This is touching, but we didn't come here to watch a scene. Both of you are coming with us. What happens after depends on how cooperative you are. That's when Eleanor remembered the pistol at her hip, in one smooth motion. Just as Stone Rivers had taught her, she drew and fired into the air. The crack of gunshots split the night, horses rearing and men cursing. The next one won't be wasted, Eleanor announced, amazed at her own steadiness. I may only get one of you before you cut me down, but I promise you this, I'll make it count. You crazy woman, Jake roared. You die for this savage. I die for the right to choose my own life, Eleanor corrected. But more importantly, I'd kill for it. So which of you wants to be first? The mob hesitated. It was one thing to terrorize an unarmed woman, another to face one who might shoot back, and they could see in her eyes that she meant every word. Then, impossibly, they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Sheriff Donnelly burst into the clearing. Deputy Charlie and Dr. Meredith close behind. The sheriff took in the scene, the mob, the weapons. Eleanor with her pistol raised, and his face went hard as granite. Evening, gentlemen, he said with dangerous calm. Heard there was a gathering out this way. Thought I'd investigate. Sheriff, Tom stammered. You're supposed to be in Carson City. Changed my mind. Donnelly replied, Good thing, too. Looks like I'm interrupting something. Anyone care to explain why you're surrounding these folks' home with weapons drawn? We came to rescue Miss Hartley, Reverend Blackwood said weakly, from her situation. With a rope, the sheriff's eyes fixed on Jake's saddle. That's an interesting rescue tool. Colby. Jake's face flushed. Now, Sheriff, you don't understand. I understand plenty. Donnelly cut him off. I understand that you waited until you thought I was gone to come out here and threaten these people. I understand that Miss Hartley has repeatedly stated she's here by choice, and I understand that what you're doing right now looks an awful lot like attempted kidnapping and assault. We're protecting a white woman's virtue, someone called from the back. No, the sheriff said firmly. You're trespassing on private property and threatening citizens with violence. Every man here is under arrest. An explosion of protests erupted, but Donnelly raised his voice. You can come peaceful, or I can deputize Mr. Rivers and Miss Hartley, and we can do this the hard way. Your choice. The fight went out of the mob like air from a punctured bladder. Faced with actual consequences, their righteous fury evaporated, one by one. They allowed themselves to be disarmed and bound for the ride back to town. As Tom Hutchinson was tied, he glared at Eleanor. This isn't over. You can't hide behind the law forever. I'm not hiding, Eleanor replied quietly. I'm standing, right where I choose to be. After the mob was led away, Sheriff Donnelly lingered. Miss Hartley, Mr. Rivers, I owe you both an apology. I should have seen this coming, should have prevented it. You came, Stone Rivers said simply, is enough. Dr. Meredith suspected something, the sheriff explained. Convinced me to postpone my trip. We've been watching the saloon, saw them ride out. Eleanor lowered her pistol at last, her hands beginning to shake as the reality of what had almost happened crashed over her. They had a rope, she said faintly. They were going to... But they didn't. Doctor, Meredith said gently. You stood your ground, both of you. After the lawmen left, Eleanor and Stone Rivers stood in the sudden quiet of their clearing. The moon had risen, painting everything in silver and shadow. Eleanor found herself shaking, the pistol heavy in her hand. Stone Rivers gently took the weapon from her, making it safe. You spoke fierce, he said softly. Warrior's heart. You were going to let them take you, Eleanor accused, tears coming now. You were going to die rather than fight. Fight would mean many deaths, he said simply. Yours maybe, worth my life to prevent. Don't you understand? Eleanor gripped his arms, needing him to hear her. Your life has worth beyond what you can sacrifice. You matter. To me, you matter. Something shifted in his dark eyes, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. Slowly, carefully, as if she might spook, he raised one hand to touch her face, thumb brushing away her tears. You matter too, he said quietly. More than you know. They stood there in the moonlight, his hand gentle on her cheek, her hands still gripping his arms. The space between them hummed with possibility, with all the words they hadn't said, all the boundaries they'd carefully maintained. Inside, Stone Rivers said finally, his voice rough. Cold tonight. But as they entered the cabin, something had changed. The careful distance they'd kept, the formal politeness. It had cracked under the weight of what they'd almost lost. They moved around each other differently now, aware in a way that was both new and ancient as the mountains. Eleanor knew the town wouldn't give up, knew this victory was temporary at best. But tonight, she was alive and free and standing in a cabin with a man who'd offered his life for her choices. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The days after the mob's attempt grew heavy with waiting. Though Sheriff Donnelly had arrested the ringleaders, Eleanor knew the town's hostility hadn't diminished. It had only gone underground, festering like an untreated wound. She felt it in the weighted silence when she and Stone Rivers went to town for supplies, in the turned backs and whispered curses that followed their steps. But something else had shifted that night under the moon. The careful boundaries she and Stone Rivers had maintained began to blur. She'd catch him watching her as she worked, his dark eyes holding something new, not desire exactly, but a deep awareness that made her breath catch. When their hands brushed passing tools or dishes, neither pulled away quite as quickly as before. One evening, as Eleanor struggled to repair a tear in her worn dress, Stone Rivers appeared at her shoulder with a small leather pouch. Sinew, he explained, showing her the thin, strong threads. Better than cotton thread, lasts longer. He sat beside her, closer than usual, and demonstrated how to work with the natural fiber. His hands, large and calloused from years of survival, moved with delicate precision. Eleanor found herself studying them instead of the technique, noticing the small scars that mapped a lifetime of work and weathering. You're not watching, he observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm sorry, she trailed off, having no acceptable explanation for her distraction. It's good to look, he said quietly, eyes on his work. I look too. When you don't see how light catches in your hair, how you bite lip when concentrating, how you stand straighter each day, like plant finding sun. Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. Stone Rivers. He set down the sinew and met her eyes directly. That night, with guns and rope, you asked why I would die rather than fight. You said I matter to you. He paused, seeming to weigh each word. Need to know, matter how. The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Eleanor thought of all the careful rules she'd been taught, all the warnings about propriety and reputation. But those rules had offered her nothing but judgment and starvation. This man had offered her dignity, teaching, partnership, choice. You matter, she said slowly. Like air matters to breathing, like fire matters to warmth. I came here broken and lost, and you helped me find myself again. Not the self the town wanted me to be, but who I really am." She took a shaking breath. "If that's improper, if that makes me truly fallen, then I accept it, because you," he prompted gently when she faltered. "Because I love you," she whispered, the words falling like stones into still water. "God help me, I love you." For a moment that stretched like eternity. Stone Rivers was perfectly still. Then he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with infinite gentleness. "Eleanor," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "You are a gift I never thought to receive, but you know what loving me means, what the world will do." "They call me ruined already," Eleanor said fiercely. "Let them. I'd rather be ruined in truth than preserved in their lies." "Not ruined," he corrected firmly. "Never ruined. Made new, like steel in fire, stronger for the burning." He leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his intent, and Eleanor met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a question and answer all at once. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Eleanor saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, we choose each day," he said simply, "together or apart, but no more pretending we are only cabin mates." That night, for the first time, they sat together by the fire. Eleanor tucked against Stone River's side, his arm around her shoulders. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was tending the small vegetable garden Stone Rivers had helped her plant when she heard a horse approaching. She tensed, reaching for the pistol she now kept always within reach, then relaxed as she recognized Dr. Meredith. "Miss Hartley," he greeted, dismounting with obvious weariness. "Is Mr. Rivers about?" "Checking trap lines," Eleanor replied. "He'll return soon. Is something wrong?" The doctor's face was grim. "I'm afraid so. The men Sheriff Donnelly arrested have been released. Judge Patterson ruled there was insufficient evidence of criminal intent." Eleanor felt ice in her veins. "But they had weapons, a rope. They threatened us." "They claimed they were merely concerned citizens checking on your welfare." "Doctor," Meredith said bitterly, The judge shares their views on certain matters. He suggested that perhaps it would be best for all concerned if you reconsidered your living situation." "You mean if I left?" "That was the implication. Yes." The doctor looked older suddenly, weighted by disgust. "Miss Hartley, I've lived in Cedar Ridge for 15 years. I've seen prejudice and cruelty dressed up as righteousness more times than I can count. But this, what they're doing to you and Mr. Rivers, it shames us all." Stone Rivers emerged from the forest then, reading the tension immediately. "Doctor," Meredith repeated his news, watching the Apache's face remain carefully expressionless. "So they come again," Stone Rivers said when the doctor finished. "With law's blessing this time." "Not blessing, doctor," Meredith corrected quickly. "But certainly with its blind eye." He hesitated, then added, "There's more. Tom Hutchinson's been talking, says he's gathering men from other towns, men who share his views on racial mixing. They're planning something, though I don't know what." Eleanor felt Stone Rivers' hand find hers. A gesture of partnership, that doctor. Meredith noted with raised eyebrows, but no comment. "We could leave," Eleanor said quietly. "Go somewhere else. Start over." "Where?" Stone Rivers asked. "What town welcomes Apache and white woman together? What place has no Tom Hutchinson, no Judge Patterson?" He was right. Eleanor knew. The prejudice they faced wasn't unique to Cedar Ridge. It was woven into the very fabric of the frontier, into the laws and customs and hearts of people who saw the world in rigid categories of us and them. "Then we stay," Eleanor said firmly. And we face whatever comes. Doctor, Meredith cleared his throat. If you're determined to stay, there might be a way to legitimize your situation somewhat. Make it harder for them to challenge. Eleanor felt Stone Rivers stiffen beside her. Speak plain, he said. Marriage, the doctor said simply. It wouldn't stop the prejudice, but it would give you legal standing. Make it harder to claim Miss Hartley is here against her will or living in sin. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor's heart raced. Marriage to Stone Rivers, not the marriage her mother had dreamed of, with church bells and white lace and social approval, but marriage nonetheless, a public declaration of choice and commitment. Who would perform such ceremony? Stone Rivers asked carefully. No church in 100 miles would bless it. I know a justice of the peace in Millbrook. Doctor, Meredith said, he's unconventional. Married a Chinese man to an Irish woman last year. Despite considerable opposition, he believes the law should apply equally to all. Eleanor looked at Stone Rivers, seeing her own tumultuous thoughts reflected in his eyes. It would change nothing between us, she said softly. We've already chosen. This would just be paper. Paper has power, he reminded her. Your name joined to mine forever. No going back to their world, even if you wished it. I don't wish it, Eleanor said firmly. I never want to go back. She turned to Dr. Meredith. How soon could it be arranged? The doctor smiled for the first time since arriving. I could send word today, perhaps by week's end. After he left, Eleanor and Stone Rivers stood in their garden, hands linked, processing what they'd just agreed to. Marriage, the word that had once represented security and social acceptance, now meant something entirely different. A battle flag raised against those who would deny their right to choose each other. Your mother, Stone Rivers said quietly. She would grieve this. Eleanor considered the question honestly. She would grieve what she'd see as my fall from society. But the society she wanted me to be part of would have let me starve rather than sully their pure community with my need. She squeezed his hand. I think, in the end, she'd want me to be loved and valued. And I am. That evening, they talked long into the night about what marriage would mean. Not just the legal binding, but the daily reality of it. The children who might come, bearing the burden of two worlds' prejudice. The constant vigilance required to protect what they built. The likelihood that violence would eventually find them, no matter how carefully they lived. I'm not afraid, Eleanor said as the fire burned low. Whatever comes, we face it together. Stone Rivers pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. Brave woman, he murmured. Warrior's heart indeed. 2 days later, the harassment began in earnest. Eleanor woke to find their garden trampled, vegetables torn up by the roots. Stone Rivers' trap lines were cut, his careful work destroyed. When they went to town for supplies, they found no one would sell to them. Sorry, Morrison said, not meeting Eleanor's eyes. Got no goods to spare. It was the same at every establishment. The town had closed ranks, attempting to starve them out. Only Dr. Meredith, risking his own practice, slipped them supplies after dark. They're testing, Stone Rivers observed as they replanted what they could salvage. Seeing if we break easy. We don't break at all, Eleanor said fiercely, though her hands were bleeding from pulling up the ruined plants. The worst came the night before they were to leave for Millbrook. Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke and Stone Rivers shaking her urgently. Fire, he said tersely. Move! They stumbled outside to find the small shed where they stored wood and tools ablaze. Stone Rivers immediately began hauling water from the creek, and Eleanor joined him. Forming a desperate bucket line, they managed to keep the fire from spreading to the cabin, but the shed was a total loss. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, Eleanor saw something that made her blood run cold. Painted on a tree at the edge of their clearing, leave or burn. Stone Rivers studied the message with flat eyes. They grow bolder. Let them, Eleanor said, exhausted but unbroken. We still go to Millbrook. We still marry. They can burn every shed from here to California. They can't burn what we are to each other. He turned to her then, his face soft with something beyond love. You humble me, he said simply. Every day, you humble me. As the sun climbed higher, they prepared for the journey to Millbrook. Eleanor donned the doe-skin dress Stone Rivers had given her, feeling its soft weight like armor. Whatever waited in town, whatever judgment or violence the future held, she would meet it as herself, chosen, partnered, unashamed. Stone Rivers watched her braid her hair with steady hands, preparing for her wedding day amid the ashes of intimidation. Ready? He asked. Eleanor turned to him, chin high and eyes clear. I've been ready since the night you carried me from that barn. She said, I just didn't know it yet. They mounted their horses and rode toward Millbrook, toward a justice who believed in equality, toward a marriage that would scandalize society and solidify their bond. Behind them, the painted threat remained on the tree, but ahead lay something stronger than fear, the life they would build with their own hands, their own choices, their own love. The world might call her fallen, but Eleanor had never felt so risen. The journey back from Millbrook as husband and wife should have felt like triumph, but Eleanor sensed trouble the moment they crested the hill overlooking their cabin. Too many horses' tracks in the dirt, fresh boot prints around their door. The air itself felt charged with menace. They've been here, Stone Rivers said quietly, reading the signs with a tracker's eye. Many men, recent. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to the simple silver band on her finger. The justice in Millbrook had been as good as Dr. Meredith's word, performing their marriage with dignity despite the shock in his clerk's eyes. Now that ring felt less like protection and more like a target painted on her hand. They approached the cabin cautiously, Stone Rivers going first with rifle ready. The door stood open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, destruction greeted them. Their few pieces of furniture lay smashed, food stores scattered and spoiled, clothes torn and strewn across the floor. On the wall, carved deep into the log, Apache lover. Eleanor surveyed the wreckage of their small, neat home, anger building like a storm in her chest. They'd destroyed not just objects, but the peace she and Stone Rivers had built, the quiet sanctuary where she'd learned to be strong again. Can fix, Stone Rivers said, but she heard the weariness in his voice. How many times had he rebuilt after hatred's visits? Yes, Eleanor said firmly. We can and will. They spent the day salvaging what they could, sweeping up broken crockery, mending torn blankets. As evening approached, Dr. Meredith arrived, his face grave. I came as soon as I heard you'd returned, he said, dismounting heavily. I'm afraid I have difficult news. More difficult than this, Eleanor gestured at their ransacked home. Tom Hutchinson's called a town meeting for tomorrow, the doctor said. He's demanding action about what he calls the moral corruption in our midst. He's got support from several neighboring towns. There's talk of... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Of taking matters into their own hands if the law won't act. The law, Stone Rivers said flatly. Same law that released them before. Sheriff Donnelly's trying to keep order, but he's one man against a growing mob. Dr. Meredith looked between them. He suggests, and I agree, that you might consider leaving, at least temporarily, until tempers cool. No, Eleanor's voice was sharp as flint. We've done nothing wrong. We're legally married, living on our own land, harming no one. I won't be driven out by bigotry and fear. Eleanor, the doctor began. Would you run? She interrupted. If it was your wife they threatened, your home they destroyed, would you pack up and flee? Dr. Meredith had no answer to that. After he left, Eleanor and Stone Rivers sat in their damaged home, the reality of their situation settling over them like snow. "He means well," Stone Rivers said eventually. "They all mean well," Eleanor replied bitterly. "But meaning well and doing good are different things." She looked at him across the table they'd managed to repair. "I meant what I said. I won't run." "Could be bad tomorrow," he warned. "Town meeting, many angry voices. Dangerous for you to go." "Dangerous for me not to go," Eleanor countered. "If we hide, they'll say it's guilt. If we cower, they'll grow bolder. No, we face them. Together." Stone Rivers studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Together," he agreed. "Always together now." That night, Eleanor wore the doe-skin dress to bed for the first time, feeling its soft embrace like armor for the battle ahead. Stone Rivers held her close, and in the darkness of their wounded home, they found strength in each other's heartbeat. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the sound of wagons and horses heading toward town. The meeting had been called for noon at the church neutral ground, though Eleanor doubted anything about it would be neutral. She dressed carefully in her one remaining respectable dress, pinning her hair severely back. Stone Rivers wore his best shirt, his hair freshly braided. They would give no one ammunition about savage appearance. The church was packed when they arrived, voices dying to whispers as they entered. Eleanor kept her head high as they walked down the aisle, feeling hundreds of eyes like beetles on her skin. They took seats in the back, Stone Rivers positioning himself between Eleanor and the aisle. Tom Hutchinson stood at the pulpit like a preacher of hate, his face flushed with righteous fury. "Good people of Cedar Ridge," he began, "we gather today to address a cancer in our community. A white woman, living in sin with a heathen savage, defiling the natural order God intended. They're married." "Doctor," Meredith called from his seat, "legally wed in Millbrook." "A piece of paper doesn't sanctify an abomination," Hutchinson shot back. "Would a paper make it right for a woman to marry a horse? A dog, the Indian is no different, a beast pretending at humanity." Eleanor started to rise, but Stone Rivers' hand on her arm stopped her. "Wait," he murmured. "Let them show themselves." And show themselves they did. One by one, citizens stood to speak their poison. The Apache was a threat to white womanhood. Eleanor was clearly under some heathen spell. Their union was an offense to God and nature. Children might result mongrel offspring that would pollute the pure bloodlines of the frontier. With each word, Eleanor felt her anger crystallize into something harder, cleaner. These people who spoke of purity and righteousness, where was their purity when they'd let her starve? Where was their righteousness when they'd offered her degradation instead of honest work? Finally, Reverend Blackwood stood. "The Bible is clear," he intoned. "We must not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. This woman has chosen to yoke herself not just to an unbeliever, but to a savage who knows nothing of Christ's love." That was too much. Eleanor stood, shaking off Stone Rivers' restraining hand. "May I speak?" The church erupted in scandalized murmurs. Women didn't speak at town meetings. Fallen women certainly didn't. "You've forfeited that right," Hutchinson declared. "Let her speak," Sheriff Donnelly commanded from near the door. "Every citizen gets their say." Eleanor walked to the front of the church, feeling like Daniel entering the lion's den. She turned to face the crowd, seeing familiar faces twisted with hate and disgust. These people had been her hoped-for community once. Now they were strangers, uglier than any hardship she'd faced. "You speak of being unequally yoked," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong. "I agree. I was unequally yoked to your expectations, your narrow definitions of worthy and unworthy. But now I'm free. Free to wallow in sin," someone called. "Free to survive," Eleanor corrected sharply. "When I came to this town, I asked for nothing but work, the chance to earn my bread honestly. Every one of you turned me away. Too proud, you said, too particular. not desperate enough to accept the only work you thought a woman alone deserved. She let her gaze sweep the crowd. You left me to freeze, to starve, to die. And when one man, yes, Reverend, a man, showed me basic human kindness, you call it corruption. When he offered shelter with no expectation, food with no price, respect with no conditions, you call it savagery. He's bewitched you, Mrs. Morrison insisted. He's loved me, Eleanor said simply, without trying to buy me, break me, or bend me into a shape that pleased him. If that's witchcraft, then I'll take it over your Christianity any day. The crowd stirred angrily, but Eleanor wasn't finished. You want to know what savagery looks like? It looks like good Christian folk watching a woman collapse in the snow and stepping over her. It looks like offering desperate people false choices between starvation and shame. It looks like breaking into our home, destroying what little we have, because our happiness threatens your small understanding of the world. Blasphemy, Reverend Blackwood thundered. Truth, Eleanor countered. And here's more truth. I love my husband. I chose him freely, married him legally, and will stand beside him against every hypocrite in this room. You can burn our barn, destroy our property, threaten our lives, but you cannot make me ashamed of choosing love over your hatred. Brave words, Hutchinson sneered. Let's see how brave you are when... He was interrupted by a commotion at the door. A group of riders had arrived. Hard-looking men Eleanor didn't recognize. They pushed into the church, and she saw several townsfolk shrink back from them. These the Indian lover and her pet savage? One of them asked Hutchinson. Eleanor felt the temperature in the room drop. These weren't local citizens nursing grievances. These were hired guns, brought in for violence. Stone Rivers rose slowly, moving to stand beside Eleanor. I am Stone Rivers, he said calmly. This is my wife. We harm no one. Live quiet. Want only peace. The lead gunman laughed. Ain't no peace for Apache who don't know their place, or white women who forget theirs. Sheriff Donnelly stepped forward. Now hold on. This is a lawful meeting, not a lynch mob. Ain't it? The gunman asked. Way I heard it, this town's got a problem needs solving. We're here to solve it. Eleanor understood with crystal clarity what was about to happen. These men hadn't come for talk. They'd come for blood, and the town would let it happen. Consciences clean because outsiders pulled the triggers. You want us gone? She said loudly, cutting through the rising voices. Fine, we'll go. Stone Rivers looked at her sharply, but she continued. Give us 3 days to pack what's left of our belongings. We'll leave Cedar Ridge and never return. It was a lie, and she saw in Stone Rivers' eyes that he knew it. But they needed to get out of this church alive, needed time to prepare for what was coming. Hutchinson smiled triumphantly. You hear that? Folks, problem solved. The Apache and his woman will be gone in 3 days. And if they ain't? The gunman asked. Then you can do what needs doing, Hutchinson said. The meeting broke up, people filing out with mixtures of satisfaction and shame on their faces. Eleanor and Stone Rivers left last, walking through the gauntlet of hostile stares. Outside, Sheriff Donnelly caught up to them. That was smart, buying time, but they'll be watching. You won't be able to slip away easy. Who says we're slipping away? Eleanor asked. The sheriff's weathered face creased with concern. Ma'am, those men Hutchinson brought in, they're killers. Professional Indian hunters. You can't fight them. Can't, Eleanor looked at Stone Rivers, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. Sheriff, I've been told I can't do many things. Can't survive alone. Can't choose my own path. Can't love who I choose. She touched the silver ring on her finger. I've learned can't is just another word for won't let you. Well, I'm done being told what I can't do. They rode home in silence, but it was the silence of partnership, of plans forming without words. At the cabin, Stone Rivers immediately began preparing checking weapons, securing what valuables they had, fortifying what could be fortified. "You know they come before 3 days," he said as he worked. "I know," Eleanor said, loading the pistol he'd taught her to use. "Probably tonight. They won't wait. Won't risk us actually leaving and robbing them of their sport." "Could still run," he offered, though she heard in his voice he no longer believed it an option. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm done running from small minds and violent hearts. This is our home, our land, our life. If they want to take it, they'll have to pay in blood." As dusk fell, they prepared for siege. Eleanor thought of the girl she'd been, begging for work in barns, accepting degradation as the price of survival. That girl was gone, burned away by hardship and reborn in choice and love. "Whatever comes," she said as darkness gathered. "I regret nothing." Stone Rivers pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Nor I. You gave me more than I dreamed. If tonight is end, I face it complete." But it wasn't the end. As the first riders appeared at the edge of their clearing, Eleanor stood ready, rifle in hand, beside the man she'd chosen. The world might call her fallen, but she'd never stood taller. "You have one chance," she called to the gathering shadows. "Leave now, and live, stay, and learn what a fallen woman and her savage husband can do when cornered." The answer came in gunfire, shattering the twilight peace. Eleanor fired back, her aim true, and beside her Stone Rivers moved like deadly wind. The battle for their right to exist had begun. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, victory or death, acceptance or eternal exile. But tonight, in the flash of gunfire and the scent of powder smoke, Eleanor Hartley Rivers was magnificently, defiantly alive. And that, she thought as she reloaded with steady hands, was worth any fall. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you listening from? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Stone Rivers' journey. Did their love triumph over prejudice? Let us know in the comments below.